folklore, and you were telling me about Lovecraft's dependency on folklore. I do kind of want to go back to where the Wolfman was talking about Leviathan, if we have time. But yeah, get started with Lovecraft, Cthulhu, the Mountains of Madness.
Okay, yeah. So Lovecraft, before years and years before Lovecraft was a horror writer, Lovecraft was a fervent antiquarian. This is why so many of his characters are antiquarians. It defined his life. Like, we know some of the greatest tragedies in his life had to do with like his inability to pursue antiquarian studies. He makes, not so much in his fiction where he tends to just make stuff up, but in his nonfiction he refers extensively to various works of antiquarian scholarship, or like archaeology. As I mentioned before this started, I was telling them that Lovecraft talks about his views on the Book of Enoch as a work of literature. Very, very familiar with traditional folklore. Less familiar, but still very familiar with some of the stranger metaphysical doctrines that have come out of antiquity in an attempt to explain folklore. And while like we tend to think like Lovecraft is an atheist, let's just be clear here, he was an atheist. Because when you bring up Lovecraft and religion, a lot of people get really mad and they're like, no, Lovecraft was an atheist. And the answer is yes, he was an atheist. But that doesn't mean his literature is reflective of the sort of hardline materialism that modern, like Carl Sagan style, like atheism we get nowadays. Lovecraft thought that the horror impulse and the religious impulse were profoundly similar. He just thought the religious impulse was delusional. That's Lovecraft's view. And that's the view he gives in the supernatural horror in literature, and in he had a journal called The Conservative, and he talks about religion a couple times. And so like Lovecraft didn't read a lot of folklore, appreciated folklore. He actually thought it had the germs of good horror, and it just remained in a crude state because it had never developed into a full form of literature. And in a way, one of the weird aspects of Lovecraft is like we look back as literature appears so weird. Aspects of his worldview are not very. I don't want to say they're like common to the modern mind, but they're definitely a lot closer to the modern mind than they are to 4th century like mystics off in the desert, as far as we're concerned. But from Lovecraft's perspective, as much as he may have been an atheist, he was also profoundly impressed with the ancient folklore of the past and integrated it into his fiction. So that was sort of what I wanted to get at. I'll let others take the floor here.
So yeah, you're saying that if you read, say, Ezekiel's visions of God's divine throne, he'd be like, this is legitimate, but y'all's response is completely wrong?
I haven't actually seen him refer to the visions of Ezekiel. He sort of touches on similar ones. He thought the visions were real-ish. He thought they could be explained by nerves. Like not like an anxiety attack, like your actual nervous system. It's an interesting view. We're getting on a digression here, but
I was talking about like the religious response to that vision. You would say,
sorry. Actually, we'll switch and we'll narrow in on that again. Yeah, in Lovecraft's perspective, horror, good horror, and this is where the word cosmic horror comes from, is at core a discovery that the uncanny or the strange is the true ground of reality, and the canny or the normal is simply false and delusion. This is what he thought good horror should do. So, like, people don't go mad when they see Cthulhu because Cthulhu's just super ugly. It's like, he's so hideous. They go mad when they see Cthulhu because of what they realize about the nature of reality. Lovecraft himself admits that this is very similar to the religious experience. As I say, he just thinks that the religious people have, like, rosy-colored glasses and we want to interpret these horrible things in, like, a wonderful way.
I was going to say is that he understands archetypes, which you were talking about before, right? But he takes them and he twists them. he's reinterpreting the archetypes, or he's mixing them. So there's a familiar thing, but then it becomes unfamiliar, and that becomes scary to us in a sense, right? He also draws on, well, I mean, Call of Cthulhu. He's got a cult in there, right? That he's using these actions and behaviors and stuff that's familiar to explain it in a different way.
That's sort of what I was trying to get at. Actually, I think maybe I shouldn't. I think I sort of get at what Zach was talking about now with Ezekiel. The vision of Ezekiel, right? He comes like it's a primal darkness. It's horrifying. And then the light pours out, right? That's, if I had to condense the whole vision of Ezekiel with all the giant wooing, like streams of eyeballs and fire and like bull-headed entities, it's this truly horrific encounter. Like imagine you're sitting around and that shows up. That was not a good day. But that acts as the catalyst for Ezekiel's realization of God. Lovecraft agrees with that, or he takes that, but he thinks it's the sort of this primordial realization of awfulness. It's like dark revelation. Like the ground of reality caves in and only endless shadow. Is that maybe a better way of so you're right in terms of what he does like as a process, but his goal is to show that our familiarity in the first place is simply an illusion.
Yeah. And he probably interpret like that, because you said he was familiar with the Enochian accounts. Was it Shadow over Innsmouth or something, where you have kind of these half fish people, which that does seem like there's this admixture going on with this supposedly divine entities. So he would say this is the bit you should be focusing in on, that these the Nephilim, for instance, this says something more fundamental about the nature of reality rather than being an aberration of the natural order. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I'd even thought of that, but now that you mention it, it occurs to me that like way back then they were big on the Enochic parallels to the Babylonian epics. I'd have to look into it more. I won't say anything for certain, but now I'm wondering if he actually did base the Shadow over Innsmouth off Enoch.